I want to welcome everyone. I'm Stephen Procopio. I'm the president of PAR, the Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana. We're a nonprofit independent watchdog and research organization. We're bringing you our monthly webinar. I really want to thank our sponsor, the Louisiana Independent Pharmacy Association, who represents your local community pharmacies. I really appreciate their support. Um, as part of our monthly webinar series, today we're going to be discussing the upcoming session. It is a fiscal session. So the focus will be on budget and taxes, although every legislature can also file 5 non-fiscal bills, including also an unlimited amount of local bills. So we're going to be talking about that. We have the session starting on April 14th. So we have a fantastic panel of legislators. Let me introduce, we're going to have Senate Education Chairman Rick Edmonds of St. George will be joining us in a little bit, but he is doing double duty, also testifying and listening to Senate Finance as the budget hearings start. But we also have a Representative Candace Newell of New Orleans. Representative, thank you so much. And we have Senate Insurance Chairman Kirk Talbot of Jefferson Parish. I suspect there's going to be 1 or 2 questions about insurance. There seems to be a lot of interest about that as well. So we appreciate you being on. So let me start with a very broad question. And let's just let y'all know, I'll ask the questions, then Melinda will take over. And then if you want to put a question in the chat, leave it in the chat or in the Q&A section, and then Melinda will take those questions, summarize them. What I will tell everyone is that no one tends to put a question in early on, and there's usually a flood of questions about half an hour in. So try to get your question in as soon as possible. All right, Representative Newell, Senator Talbot, what are going to be your main priorities for the session coming up? Representative, you want to start first?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Stephen and Melinda, for inviting me on to participate today. My focus will be ensuring supporting legislation which would give our citizens some sort of relief when it comes to the price of insurance. And if that is legislation that's going to give discounts to insurance, if it's legislation that will support looking at and changing the homestead exemptions, that's one of my priorities. Ensuring that our students have good education, access to education from K through 12 on up to higher education, community college and work training programs. My continuous passion is civil rights, especially when it comes to elections. I love being on House and Governmental Affairs. It's always a very lengthy and lively conversation there. So I'll be paying a lot of attention to the proposed changes to our election code that we've already had a little preview of, and I'm expecting more legislation to come that will impact that election code, as well as our open meetings laws. I'm seeing and hearing from a lot of our citizens who express concerns about the laws around access to whether it's parish meetings or the meetings that we have on the state level. So I have a lot of interests this year, and I can't wait to see what happens in this regular 2025 session.
Good, and we're always glad to see you when we're in front of House and Governmental Affairs on those issues and many others. So Senator Talbot, so she scooped you a little bit on insurance, but I suspect you might be interested in that as well. What might be some of your major issues that you're going to look at this session?
Well, first, the Fortified Roof Program is going great. We just had the Louisiana State Auditor just issued a report last week that said that the average savings that a homeowner is getting is 22%, which has exceeded what we thought it was, and it exceeds what they're saving in Alabama, which is the only other state that has really in the forefront of fortified roofs, and they put on more than anybody. So we want to make sure, and I'm collaborating with Commissioner Temple to find a dedicated stream of funding for the Fortified Roof Program. He has talked about assessing the industry, which I think is a great idea to take care of some of that. And what I want to do is I want to do a tax credit. So right now it's a $10,000 grant, right? And you apply in the lottery, and if you're lucky enough to get picked, you can get $10,000 to apply to retrofit your home with a fortified roof. What I would like to do, and I've already filed the bill, is do a non-refundable tax credit for $10,000 that can be rolled over for 3 years, where if you have the money now, you can front the money, put the roof on now, and then you can claim this $10,000 non-refundable tax credit. And, you may not have a $10,000 tax liability the first year, but you can roll it over for 3 years and do it that way. And that would, that would really, I think, blow open the fortified roof program even more. And look, does that have a fiscal cost? It absolutely does. But we've done tax credits, tax deductions, grants for a lot of things over the years. What better way to do this than help constituents directly, not just big businesses or small businesses, which I'm for, but this is something that, look, if we're going to live here in South Louisiana and sustain reasonable homeowners insurance, we got to have fortified roofs. That's the only way we're ever going to live here. So I think it's a great investment. I don't think it would blow a hole in the budget, just insofar as there's only so many roofers that are even certified to do fortified roofs. They're growing by the month, and also inspectors to inspect those roofs. But you can spread this out over 3 years, and you're also going to be able to still use the grant program. And since we're not going to take money from the state to fund the grant program, that is kind of an offset. So that's something that I'm going to be working on really hard. As far as auto insurance goes,
let me stop you just for 1 second. I want to make sure I recognize that Senator Edmonds joined us. As I said, he's pulling double duty. Just to give you a heads up, I've asked the other panelists to tell us what their main priorities for the session are. So I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. And Senator Talbot, if you tell us what your other priorities were.
Yeah, just real quick, I want to touch on auto insurance. We've done a lot with property insurance the last couple of years, a bunch of legislation. We've rewritten the entire claims process, the appraisal process, all these different things. We really haven't done a lot on auto insurance. Brian Glorioso has a bill that's been pre-filed that basically just allows medical transparency on medical bills and expert testimony. Doesn't mandate that a jury or a judge do anything as far as an award to a plaintiff. It just has some transparency. That bill is getting a lot of attention, so that's something that I'm interested in. Obviously, we're limited on our 5 non-fiscal bills, so I don't know if I'm going to personally file a tort reform bill, but I'm certainly going to be backing some good bills out there that make sense and that that are good for everyone. So those are basically the things that I'm looking at this session.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, Senator Edmonds, thank you for joining us. I know you're very busy. Basically, what are your main priorities for this session?
Good morning. I appreciate allowing me in and out on the double duty on finance. Let me give you a couple of updates that I think are very important. Last year, we raised the cap on the Murphy J. Foster program, which basically moved it to about $40 million. Now, we did not fund it, but at least we got the cap raised. We found that program to be extremely successful. And we'll be looking for some additional money and funding for that, about $25 million this year, which get it off its original $10 million or so, which basically we spent last fall $10 million in one semester. So we're finding a great amount of adults that's that 25 to 45 that need some kind of credentialing. And so we think this is a really strong proposal that we'll be looking for those funding. Glad we raised that cap. So very proud of what's going on in the Murphy J. Foster Promise program. Met with those guys last week, and we're excited about that. I also met with Dr. Kim Hunter-Reid multiple times, and one of the particular things that we're interested in is, as the governor is interested in this outward migration. We are having about 40% of our college graduates, when they graduate, 40% of them, according to data, are leaving the state, going somewhere else for a job, better job, better opportunities, et cetera. So we're working now with folks like Adam Knapp, Dr. Kim Hunter-Reid, the workforce development folks, as we did last year, to try on the front end to form a task force that will take a look at how each university can be involved with career paths on the front end, as well as their graduation rates. And so we're just getting started on that, but I think it has some good potential. It seems like each one of those guys are pretty excited about that. So we look forward to getting that done. Just a couple other updates. I think we've heard that we're rising up on our education report cards. We heard last couple of weeks is really outstanding. Dr. Kate Brumley's doing a great job. I think now we're number 32, and so we've been 49 or 50, as you guys are well aware. Our high dose tutoring, we're looking to fund again to make certain that we get that in. That means that during the day, Senator McMath passed that last year. We got it funded. We're looking to fund it again in the from the educate back with the Board of Regents to get that back in with the MFP. So I think those are quick things, real quick that I'm interested in. Obviously, there'll be several others. Kurt's already mentioned, we're limited with our local bills and our 5, but I think these are some really strong things that are going to occur during this session.
Those are great. Thank you. We're starting to get some questions in the Q&A, which is fantastic. Before we get to those, Melinda, do you have a couple of questions you want to take over?
Sure. Thank you. As Stephen said, if you have questions, please enter them in the Q&A because they're starting to roll in. So I know obviously y'all have already had a special session in November that focused primarily on taxes. And y'all made a ton of significant changes during that time period, but this is a fiscal session coming up, so you can talk about taxes again. Do you expect the tax debate to continue in the regular session? And are there specific areas you'd like to revisit from the special session or places you'd like to make changes? Senator Talbot, I know you talked about this fortified roof tax credit program. Is that your main tax priority? And do you have any estimates on how much that would cost the state?
I guess it is my main tax issue. I don't sit on the money committee, so but I was pleased with what happened in the special session. I don't see anything off the top of my head that needs to be looked at again. There may be some, that's just not something that I've focused on right now. We're working on a fiscal note for my bill. Don't have any preliminary numbers right now, but I can tell you that the grant program is popular, and there's obviously more applicants than people that are awarded that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody who didn't get the lottery would go put the roof on themselves because they may not have the money to front to do that. So I think it's a little bit of a, it'll be a fiscal note, but I don't think it'll be too hard. But again, the fortified roof is a program that is kind of like the tide that lifts all boats. The more houses that have them, the less risk that insurance companies have, which enables them to take more risk to write in areas where they normally wouldn't do, because they know they have a nice, safe little percentage of their portfolio that has a fortified roof on it. So it really just kind of compounds and pounds and makes it better and better for everyone. So we'll see, but we're looking at it.
Okay. Representative Newell, are there any tax items from the special session that you'd like to revisit or that you expect to see revisited, or any other tax issues you prioritize this session?
I would like to see everything that we've done as far as taxes revisited, just so that we can give it a little bit more time and discussion over it. I know we had the bill for 2 weeks. However, by me not sitting on the money committees and have that thorough conversation and debate on it, I only saw it for maybe 4 days on the House floor. And as much as we are proposing to change in the Constitution, I would have liked to just have a little bit more of a conversation with our staff to get a better understanding as to what our budget is really going to look like once we make these cuts, once we redirect spending and allowing the parishes to either no longer collect the corporate tax or allowing parishes to be able to keep some of the taxes that they collect from the oil and gas. I would like to see what that bottom dollar is going to look like. I was not opposed to having a thorough look at Article 7 in the Constitution. It was just the timing that we had. I don't think we put enough time in that full discussion, and I did not have the time with the experts that I would have liked to make me comfortable with being in full support of a total overhaul of Article 7. So I'm hoping to see more. However, by me being in the majority and being one of the few that disapproved of it, I doubt very seriously that I'm going to get my wish. I'm seeing right now that we do have a few minor tax bills that we're going to be discussing this year. I'm just interested to see how much funding we can continue to put towards state programs, as well as assisting our locals with some of the endeavors that they have, and I would like to see in this next coming year. So that's what I'm interested in seeing.
Okay. Senator Edmonds, any tax issues you would like to revisit in the upcoming session?
Well, I think the session could take a completely different turn if obviously if the amendments are not successful on the 29th. Now, of course, we certainly hope that they will be, but obviously that remains to be seen by the voters next week. And of course, if that were to occur and it fails, then I think it's a totally different discussion that we would have. But outside of that, if the amendments pass, I think you'll probably see a little bit of language tweaking on. There was concern about Amendment 2 and how that affected. In fact, there was a lawsuit that was filed over some of the language issues and how it affected churches or 501c3s and some of the properties. So there could be some tweaking on that just to bring a little more comfort to some of our churches or synagogues. But outside of that, I haven't heard anything that I think is, extreme. I think we got a lot of work done. I do agree with Representative Newell. It was quick, and we worked fast. However, I will also say that I think you guys are well aware that over this past 10 years, this has been multiple years that we have worked on very similar situations, whether it was flat tax down to 3% or a little above or other issues. Almost all of those had been extremely vetted over the years, and I think we finally were able to bring to culmination a strong move forward for our constituents of saving them tax dollars. So a little tweaking here or there, but I don't think there'll be overwhelming changes. The other thing before I do have to go is we've had an outstanding beginnings of our ESA, which is basically now about 25,000 or so, and I think it's going to rise higher than that by the time we get to the 15th of April. So we're excited about that. There was a good report given in joint budget last week about how the program has been laid out. And so phase 1 is well on its way. And Act 1 of the legislature last year from Governor Landry's Gator program is, I think, off to a really solid start.
The 25,000 number is the number of applicants for
Applicants, about
program, right?
20,000. Yeah, about 20,000 of them are actually apparently qualified, which means they were either a part of the scholarship program, the vouchers that are moving over, or their kindergarten, or enrollees from the parishes now. They won't obviously all be granted seats because we're waiting on the funding. Governor Landry has asked for an additional $50 million. We got about 43-ish that is in the voucher program that's moved over under that umbrella. He's asked in his executive budget for about 50 more. So somewhere 95 million, somewhere in that ballpark would be if the legislature deems it, the right direction to go. But looks like our parents and families are extremely interested.
Senator Edmonds, I know you're going to dip off soon, but let me ask you about truancy while we have you, because I know that's a significant problem that Louisiana has been grappling with. And I know that the education committees have been talking about that a lot. Is there a legislative fix for how to handle truancy issues? I mean, how do you make sure that kids show up for school?
Yeah, I wished I had the the magic potion for that. I'm not going to pretend to say that is an easy answer, but I do know that we have from the court systems, we have all the way to the Supreme Court, we have people that are interested in trying to help us solve this issue of truancy. And it's not in every parish. I was at Livingston last about a week and a half ago. And for example, their data reflects that they have 92% of their kids are in school. So if that was the case in all the parishes, we wouldn't be having that discussion. But if I look at East Baton Rouge Parish, I mean, it may drop down to 50%, a really, really difficult one in a very large parish. So we're looking at the criminal justice side of that, what we do with parents. We're looking at funding issues of what might could, be responsible to say, listen, if they're not in class, Texas basically said if they're not in class, we're not gonna fund it. I mean, those are extremes, and I'm certainly not saying any of that's going to happen, but I think we're going to look at everything because, and there's several legislators that are extremely interested in trying to help our educators get these kids in class and get a good future for them.
Okay. We have a question about Senate Bill 14 from Senator McMath that has been pre-filed. This is a bill to prohibit the ultra processed foods from being in public schools or in any private schools that get state funds, and also I think not to be allowed in terms of any kind of state programs for the SNAP program or such to pay for these kind of foods. I guess I'm going to ask all three of you, do you support this concept, and what do you think in terms of whether or not this is something that is easy to actually roll out in terms of affecting schools, low-income families that get food assistance from the state, et cetera?
If you don't mind, I'm going to go first because I got to go back to finance, and I'm so sorry. But let me do this real quick, and then I'll. I think that is sort of dovetailing the what's going on nationally of what is the imbalance in some of our foods that could be causing cancer-related issues or other nutritional problems that are harming our children. And so I'm sure that nationally, as that is looked at, I'm sure we're going to look very strong at what we can do or what we should do. It's a brand new concept. I don't think we've covered that in the last few years. And so I'll have to be, I'm very interested in anything that will help keep our health in line for our children, support those children. I'm certainly going to take a deep look at it and see what kind of facts go with that. And with that said, I'll let my esteemed colleagues take over, and I'll go back to finance and see if I can listen to some more budget.
Thank you very
Senator
much,
Edmonds. So Representative Newell, any thought about ultra processed foods and trying to ban them from public schools and from food assistance programs?
Now, I would like to see the over processed foods kind of moved out of the school system, but banning it from being purchased with the SNAP gives me great pause, because although I'm in New Orleans, I represent an area that is considered a food desert by definition. So most of the time, that's all that the people have access to is the foods that they can purchase quickly out of the freezer, out of the Dollar General, the Family Dollar, corner stores. So I would not, excuse me, want to take a full ban of that until we can get more access, not only in my district, but in other districts that are considered food desert, until we can get those citizens more access to fresh fruits, vegetables, and unprocessed meats. So I would, it's going to be a rare time where I agree with Senator Edmonds and say that I do want to see more information, what is really being considered. But right now, that I want to hear the conversation around it and the true intent. Because right now, I can't say that that's something that I agree with. For what I just said, I represent a food desert, and that's sometimes the only food people in my district have access to, and I would not want to take that away from them feeding their family.
And I'm also just looking at the bill as we're talking, and it also apparently requires doctors, family medicine doctors, internal medicine, pediatric physicians to provide education on ultra processed foods and how it affects nutrition and health. So just FYI, that bill does a lot of different things
It does a lot. I'm looking at it too, and that information is great to have, but when you don't have access to the foods that are being suggested, that's a whole nother conversation, that needs to be considered.
Senator Talbot, thoughts on banning ultra-processed foods in schools and in the SNAP program? And I'm also going to throw another one at you because Senator McMath has several hot button topics. He is also one of the co-sponsors of a bill that would ban fluoride in the public water systems. Thoughts on those bills and where you stand on them? Have you talked to Senator McMath yet about those ideas?
Not, and honestly, I don't even know what an ultra processed food is. I don't know what the definition of that is. Certainly, I wouldn't want to do anything that's going to cause, low income public school kids to not have access to food. I haven't seen the bill. I'm not going to comment either way on it until I read it. But Candace brings up some concerns, and so does Senator Edmonds. So we'll take a look, and that won't be coming through my committee, but I'm sure we'll get an earful on that from people. As far as the fluoride goes, I have heard of that bill. I'm kind of getting myself familiar with that whole fluoride issue. I'm going to kind of take a wait and see attitude on it and just kind of see what the pros and cons are, and kind of, hopefully that'll help me get a good idea. I mean, look, if it makes sense, if both those bills make sense, then I'm for them, but those are some hot topic, hot button issues that can, might suck a lot of the air out of the room in the session. You always think it's going to be these big ticket items that dominate the session, but I could see either one of those bills getting a lot of attention. So we'll wait and see.
Yeah, those
I
are
could
not
see
core,
committee
those are not
rooms
core
filled with
part
dentists.
issues. Yeah.
Yeah,
T-shirts are being printed as we speak. I guarantee you.
right.
I am imagining that a lot of issues from Washington are starting to filter down this way into the legislative session, pre-filed bills, it appears. Which, speaking of Washington, somebody has asked a question about potential Medicaid funding cuts at the federal level. Have y'all heard any discussions starting among legislators or staff or the governor's office about the threat of potential cuts to Medicaid or these other federal funding sources, which obviously make up 50% of the state's budget? Is there any planning going on, or do you have any concerns about the need for planning about those kind of things? And I'm just going to start with Representative Newell on this one.
I have not heard of any conversations, but I do have concerns because if there are cuts at the federal level, eventually there are going to have to be cuts here on the state level. I definitely would think that we needed to start preparing ourselves just in case those cuts come, because again, a large majority of my constituents depend on Medicaid and Medicare. I tell people all the time, I was 35 when I decided to quit my job and go to law school. And being a 35-year-old woman and not having health care, Medicaid was all I had. That's all I had access to. And then when I graduated studying for the bar, I was still bartending. Clubs don't offer you benefits, health benefits, dental or vision. So that was all I had access to. And that was me as a single person. So I'm thinking of the families and their concerns that have children, especially young children, pregnant mothers. Just it's just a big concern to think that we're going to have to cut back on providing services to our families. This state, we have a lot of contract workers, whether that's people that work contract workers and gig workers, whether it's in the food and beverage industry or whether it's people who work on seasonally on the river, or we just don't we don't have the traditional workforce of the other 49 states. Louisiana is unique in so many different ways, and I love it because of that. But I would really be interested to see what those cuts are going to look like, and I would definitely like to be a part of and just to listen to the plans that we would have for our citizens here in Louisiana to make sure that we have a healthy society.
Senator Talbot, has there been any starting discussions in the Senate? I know y'all often have meetings to talk through financial issues. Are y'all at the point of discussing the potential cuts that could be coming from the federal government on Medicaid or any other front at this point?
Any specific talks, but let me reiterate or say that when people talk about, and when President Trump talks about cuts to Medicaid, I don't think he's talking about sitting around saying, needy people are getting too much money, let's cut them. It's rooting out the waste and the fraud, that there are people who are getting Medicaid that shouldn't get it, that are not qualified for it and are getting it anyway. I think that's what the president's talking about when he says we want to cut Medicaid, and when the governor says, we want to, cut Medicaid. That is not saying that the amount of money that a needy single pregnant mother gets is too much, and we're going to trim that by 10%. There's thousands of people in this state that are getting Medicaid that shouldn't get it, that don't qualify for it and shouldn't be getting it. And I think that's what we all, at least my opinion, that we want to root out and make sure the people that deserve it get it, and the people that frankly don't deserve it or don't qualify for it shouldn't get it. So that's when people say cutting Medicaid, that's how I translate that. It's not we're all sitting around saying, that's just too much money, let's just cut them 10% so we can save money. It's rooting out the waste and the fraud and the abuse.
But let me do a quick follow-up, because there's the Medicaid, but there's also discussions on, for example, either dismantling or changing, FEMA, and we get a lot of disaster, unfortunately here. And then we also have colleges and universities are hit by the National Institute of Health. And some of these things have not been worked out. Also Department of Education changes, and some of these are still being discussed. But particularly with FEMA, are there concerns that you have? Do you want to make sure that the federal lawmakers protect a particular thing, or just want to kind of wait and see?
My big thing with FEMA, I guess it's really the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, is transparency. Matt Jewell, the president of St. Charles Parish, has been out front on this. And, I'm going to an insurance conference of insurance legislators in April in South Carolina. Mainly the only reason why I'm going is during session is to try to force the federal government and the NFIP to start showing us how they've come up with this ridiculous risk rating 2.0 and these rates that are crushing Candace and I's constituents on flood insurance. We have no transparency. They have not told us how they come up with these ridiculous rate increases. And it's completely bizarre and just crazy the way they come up with this. So that's what I would like to see FEMA and the NFIP start doing, is showing us some transparency on how they do this and their justifications for doing it.
Right, thank you.
Okay, speaking of insurance, we have somebody who submitted a question about property insurance and specifically home insurance. He is saying that his insurance company demands thousands of dollars worth of changes to his home that exceed the building code situation. I guess I'm wondering, have y'all heard of examples about this where people are being asked by their insurance companies to make changes to the home to keep coverage, or to keep coverage at a consistent rate? And I'm just going to start with you, Senator Talbot, since this is obviously
or to insure at a higher level than they currently are, like they up their level of insurance.
Look, I can't speak to any specific examples. I don't know what that house looks like, but I know there's instances where, you might have a 20-year-old roof that's falling apart, and they say, look, either fix your roof or we're not going to cover you, or you're not going to get the kind of coverage that you want unless you mitigate some of the problems you have. Maybe you have cloth wiring, maybe you have rotten windows that are more subjective to blowing in with a wind, or maybe you have a roof that's too old. But the building codes are something that we've increased those or tightened those building codes even more last year. We're not at the fortified roof level yet, from what I've been told. So that's something that we're going to look at. But I mean, as far as that specific example, I don't know what that house looks like, but I know there are instances where insurance companies will come out and inspect your home and say, look, your roof is old, it's got shingles falling off, fix your roof, or we're not going to insure you. I think that happens all the time.
If I could just follow up, then there's also a part where I've heard from people, they say, oh, look, my house is insured at the $200,000 level, but the insurance company, oftentimes at the behest of the reinsurer, say, no, if we had to replace this house, it'd be $300,000, and we're not going to cover it unless you increase your coverage, which also raises the amount.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, you'd have to ask Commissioner Temple that, but I believe there's some talk about, I don't know what the terminology is, but like, let's just say it cost $30,000 to replace your roof. Instead of having a piecemeal policy where you say, look, just cover me for $10,000, I'll pay the rest, or I just want to pay this amount for my house. If it's $300,000 to rebuild it, just cover me for $200,000 and I'll make up the difference. I think there's some talk about doing that where it's a little more flexible, where instead of that person being told see the door and getting shut out of insurance altogether, where they can just say, look, let me insure up to this certain amount, I'll take the hit on the rest of it. But I think that idea is being talked about, but that's something that commissioner would really have to answer. But it makes sense, and the scenario you lay out is a bad scenario for the homeowner, right? I mean, they ought to be able to say, look, just let me insure what I can afford, and after that I'll take the risk on that instead of kicking me out completely.
Representative Newell, I know you also brought up insurance as a major issue for you. Are you confident that the state can actually make changes that will impact people's property insurance or auto insurance rates, or do you think this is something where the federal government has to get involved?
Okay. I believe the legislature has put forth some really good legislation in the past that would address some of the concerns of our citizens. We have not seen, well, I have not seen that support from our other elected officials as far as really helping to see those changes and those reductions come to pass. The other part was, as far as the federal government coming in, I do believe the federal government should come in and do some type of regulation across the board with some of these insurance companies, because we have too many insurance companies that are coming in making these demands. I have not personally had constituents come to me to say that they've been asked to make thousands of dollars of changes. However, several years ago, I was required to make changes on my home, and it was for a patio that was not attached to the home. It had its own roof, and I had been covered at that point. I think I had been covered for about 5-6 years, and they told me if I did not remove the patio, I would not get coverage for my home. So I was out there with a ladder and a hammer myself trying to remove this, just so that I could continue getting coverage for my home. And just the constant change. Recently, Friday, I started looking at another insurance policy, and policies are ranging from $6,000 to $8,000 for the same coverage, and the same deductibles for contents and for structure. So I believe that the federal government needs to come in and put some type of regulation over it, over the insurance industry. I can't speak as eloquently as Senator Talbot because I'm not on insurance. I'm just speaking of a ratepayer and an elected who hears these concerns quite often from the people that we represent here. So like I said, the legislature has put forth some great ideas. We just haven't gotten the support that we needed from other folks around the state to make sure that we get protection from the industry and protection for our constituents.
Senator Talbot, not surprisingly, we have a ton of insurance questions. So I'm going to ask you another one.
Okay.
Obviously, last year, the pro tort reform groups had a disagreement with the governor over the approach of some of the legislation. And the governor, I believe, vetoed one of the bills and others sort of stalled amid his concerns. Has anything changed on that front? Is there, have there been any meetings or any conversations that have shifted that conversation, or is it going to be sort of a repeat of the last session where there are some of these debates that just don't end up going anywhere?
After that bill, I think it was Mellor's bill that was vetoed, right at the end of session. When session was over, the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House told a lot of the chairmen, told us, said, look, y'all need to have off-session meetings, start over, look at why, the number one question is, why are we the highest auto insurance rates in the country, right? And they said, look at everything from 30,000 feet, look at everything from the time you get in a wreck, when you go to the hospital, when you get your bill paid, when you get treated, when you get your car fixed, everything. And it kind of in an unprecedented way. We had 3 Senate committees, Jude A, Jude C, Senate Insurance, 2 House committees, House Civil Law and House Insurance, 5 committees meeting simultaneously. We met about 5 or 6 times between now and then, which is right at the end of session. And I'll tell you what it's not, what we found out. It's not our roads. It's not fatalities. It's not car thefts. It's not uninsured motorists, underinsured motorists. We looked at everything to see what is making us so different, because every state around us is not even in the top 10. And unlike property insurance, where we know we have problems, right, with property insurance, we have a large coast, we have a high propensity of named storms making landfall, we have a majority of our population lives below I-10, so they're in a hurricane zone. In auto insurance, there's no reason why Louisiana should be the way we are based on being just in Louisiana. All you have to do is step across the state line and you're going to see very affordable rates compared to what we have now. What we did find out is that the rate of litigation in Louisiana is 2 to 3 times the national average. The bodily injury rate in an accident is twice the national average. So let's say for every 100 wrecks, I'm just making up numbers here, 20% of those in this country involve bodily injury. It's double that here, even though we have the same body type as everybody else. The payout for those bodily injury claims double the national average, even though it's the same surgery procedure here than anywhere else. So our system is lending itself to causing us to have these high rates. So I think you're going to see, we know we're limited on what we can do. I think you're going to see a different approach like I mentioned with Glorioso's bill, not mandating that a jury does anything, not limiting the amount of money a plaintiff can be awarded, which, by the way, all the other states around us are doing. Mississippi has a cap on bodily injury damages. Arkansas only reimburses you, this sounds crazy now, for what you actually paid for your medical bill. Here, we reimburse you for bills that you never paid, which causes rates to go up. Texas, they have a big tort reform package right now in Texas. Florida has tied the repayment of medical bills to a formula with Medicaid or Medicare. Yes, Medicaid. Alabama has total transparency. That's what we're kind of looking to do. Let's just let everything, let the jury and the judge have all the information and let them decide what the claim is. One of our problems here is insurance companies won't fight fraudulent claims, and they won't fight the fraudulent claims because they can't submit the medical bills to fight those, because you're not fighting over the property damage of the vehicle, you're fighting over the bodily injury. So I know that was a long answer to your question. It's kind of going to be some of the same and some of the new in an approach on what we do. We know we're limited on what we can pass and what the governor will sign. So we're going to, I think Glorioso's bill is a great step. It's House Bill 34. I would highly encourage your members to take a look at that bill. It makes sense. And I think that's a good step to get us on the right path.
Okay. I'm going to switch topics. Somebody has questions about Amendment 2. I'm not going to make anybody explain what Amendment 2 does. We did a whole webinar on that, and it takes 45 minutes just to explain that amendment. But I am going to say this question is about If Amendment 2 does not pass, obviously that amendment has some mechanisms to provide a funding source to make the teacher stipend a permanent raise. And it has some other mechanisms in the merger of some trust funds that would give the legislature additional money in the general fund to spend. So are you anticipating that if Amendment 2 were not to pass, that y'all would revisit the tax discussion and possibly look at raising revenue in some place? And I'm just going to start with Representative Newell because it's your turn.
Okay, I'm sorry. Say the second part of the question again.
If Amendment 2 were not to pass, and I just want to say we have no idea the outcome because that election is this weekend,
Right.
would you be willing to consider looking at, some sort of other taxes and tax increases, whether that's, sin taxes or gaming taxes or something, to fill in any budget holes that you see, to perhaps give, make that stipend permanent, or do anything else that you would like to see at the state level?
Oh, yes, as I said before, I would entertain a longer, more robust conversation about our whole tax code. I would look at, because as you know, for the past 4 years, I have introduced legislation to regulate recreational marijuana that also had a companion legislation to tax it, to put more money in towards our general funds. So that's one sin tax that we don't collect now. That will be a new revenue source. I would not be opposed to looking at other services. The service bill that we had before, that was just too much at one time, that we were looking at and not knowing how it would impact our residents. But I would not be opposed to looking at other ways to cover that deficit, to ensure that our teachers continue to receive the stipend. But I would really, really like to have the conversation to look at how we can raise revenues to give our teachers a true pay raise and bring them at least to the Southern average for teachers. And that Southern average is still significantly lower than the national average, as as Senator Edmonds said about us having that big migration out of state. We're starting to see teachers leaving, and we want families here. We want families to grow here. We want families to come here. But when we have these families, we need to ensure that their children are being educated, and we need to ensure that their children are being educated by qualified teachers. And we can't keep qualified teachers if we're not paying them. So I would definitely look and entertain those questions as to seeing how we're going to fund that to give our teachers a true pay raise.
Senator Talbot, I know you voted for the bill that had the constitutional amendment, so I know you support it and would like to see it pass, but would you be willing to consider other revenue sources, other tax types, if constitutional amendment 2 fails this weekend?
Failed. I don't think it's not the end of the world. I don't see an appetite in this legislature. You need 2/3 vote to raise revenue. But look, if you want to give teachers a raise, vote for amendment number 2. If you want to give teachers a raise, let's get some common sense auto insurance reform that lowers the insurance rate for teachers. I mean, when you're trying to recruit teachers from other states, Texas, Arkansas, Florida, Mississippi, when they come to Louisiana and see that sticker shock on their auto insurance, that means a lot on a salary that they get. But if we want to give teachers a raise, vote for amendment number 2. They'll get a raise in 2 ways. One, they'll get the raise that's in the amendment, and 2, they're going to pay less in state taxes. But to answer your first question, I just don't see the appetite, if amendment 2 fails, of getting a 2/3 vote in both houses, both bodies, to raise taxes. I just don't see it. But that's just my opinion.
No, I can't let Representative Newell, who's on the Government Affairs Committee, pass without asking a few questions. What do you see in terms of issues like campaign finance reform? I know there's been a lot of work and hearings on that. Also ethics. And then there's at least one bill on civil service changes. And so I'm I'm curious on those sort of three areas of civil service, ethics, campaign finance. What would you like to see, and what are some of your concerns?
Um, I hadn't seen any legislation unless I skipped over it about the campaign finances. We did raise the limits last year. I think that was last session. And so I'm already seeing that because we are approaching in here in Orleans Parish a mayoral election. So already hearing the talks with about the raising of campaign contributions from that. With ethics, we had a discussion of ethics. Some of the rules have changed. And I'm also seeing more conversations and interest in the open meetings laws and the access to information, the access to seeing these meetings live stream, as opposed to being required to come in person to hear it. I'm always in favor of citizens having access to the meetings, even if it's not in a way where they can live participate, just so that they can hear and see live what's going on. If you don't have transparency, we don't have trust. And we need to have our constituents to trust us when we go and talk to them and when we making our decisions. What's the third area you asked me?
And I think you work with PAR on some of those live streaming for meetings as well. And I appreciate
You
that.
and I on that subcommittee together.
Exactly. Now, let me ask, the last one was about civil service changes. So I know there's the governor had some a specific proposal, but then there's, I think, a constitutional amendment that would widen that open a little bit more. Is that something you'd like to see, or you have concerns?
No, I would not like to see it. Yes, I do have concerns. Again, that is an area where we would need to have more education for some of my colleagues and to understanding that there are mechanisms in place for management to fire workers who have not been performing their job duties. There are rules and laws that these civil service workers must abide by. There are educational standards that are in place along with time and service that is required in order for someone to move up the ranks in civil service. So it's not people just arbitrarily given uh raises and promotions. They had to work their way up there, whether it's education that they came with through the door, or if it's education that they earn over the years of being there, taking classes that is offered by the Civil Service Department. Before coming to the legislature, I was a civil service worker. I've always worked in government, whether it is as a teacher. I was the school-based clinic supervisor at 35, and then I was the board relations manager at Surgeon Water Board. And I did have to remove a one of my employees out of my department, and I had to do my paperwork. It was tedious. It did take time away from my other duties, but it needed to be done so that I can get the outcome that I wanted. She was not performing in my department. This is what was in place, and I followed that process. As far as taking the time to promote others, I encourage them. Here's a list of classes within your classification. Take these classes. So it's a concern to me when we want to just take a broad sweep and remove people who have gone through the process and taken the steps to get the promotions and the raises that they have. So that is concerning to me. And no, I don't want to see it.
Okay, thank you very much. Melinda, you have one more question?
Sure. This one is for Senator Talbot. You were a House member before you were a Senator member, so you have been around long enough to have heard many conversations about trying to reorganize the Department of Transportation and Development, make changes, and get more money out of administration and into roads and bridges. There is another discussion of the reorganization of DOTD plan for this session. Are you optimistic that there are real changes that can be made that that can actually move forward in some fashion and that will gain traction in the legislature? Do you think there are changes that need to be made there?
I think there's changes that need to be made. I mean, DOTD, look, they got some great people over there, great engineers, great workers, but it is a, you know, it's wrought with problems, with cronyism, with mismanagement and inefficiencies. And from what I've heard, there've been some high level talks about dismantling completely the DOTD and reconfiguring it. And anytime you do an exercise like that, I think it's beneficial. You know, maybe at the end product doesn't look much different than it does now, but you learn a lot more about it and kind of kick over the anthill and see what all is going on. But from what I've heard, there've been some high level discussions about completely, you know, revamping the entire department. I think that's a healthy discussion.
I want to thank y'all so much for taking the time to do this. I know y'all are trying to prepare for session, also, you know, run your lives, which we forget that legislators have lives. So I do appreciate you taking the time to do this. I think this was a great conversation. I think people learned a lot. I also like that y'all modeled excellent civic discourse. So I once again, thank you for this so much. I want to remind everyone that this, you know, it will probably be on our, this webinar will be on our YouTube channel, just like all our other previous ones. I want to thank everyone, and I look forward to seeing what actually happens in session. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.